Okay, so you guessed it. So a little bit of cam and grasshopper. So every time we get a 6 or 4 claw setting, we turn the setting upside down and we draw these little supports, or we have ready-made supports that we drew. Basically, I guess something like this. You come out and then you pipe the item with variable thicknesses and a smaller thickness over there, and then you, I don't know, array polar, maybe 6 of them, whatever the story is. You can do that. It's not an invalid workflow. So if you look at this and you go in the top world and you do an array polar, so 0 and 6 of them. All right, so you got that. So let's grab all these items, let's lock them down, I guess from there, not touching the curve. It means that you have a valid workflow where you can move this curve around using history, and you can quickly adapt this to different size collets as they come into run. What you haven't got is the ability to change the tip diameter here or the tip diameter here. Right? You'd have to rerun the pipe command for that, or you'd have to build this very carefully with history to have a sweep. But when you move this over here, then the circle for the sweep, then move with the curve, it becomes a little awkward. So there are times and places where you would jump to grasshopper to produce a few constructs. Okay, so I'm going to hop out of here. Let's get rid of all that stuff we did. Yep, and get rid of the curve. And let's talk about how we do the same thing in grasshopper that gives us a better outcome. All right. So we're going to start off with the same way we drew that curve. We had a point and a point and a point, and then we drew a line through them. In my case, I'm going to use an arc. All right. So in grasshopper, sorry, it's really difficult to record these on a small screen. I want to go to the vector area. You can see I can construct a point. So I need to construct 3 points in this instance, a bottom point. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to Control C and Control V and Control V. So when you draw an arc, you need a start point, a midpoint, and an end point for the arc. So let's throw those 3 out there. So you'll notice that we've already got a point out here, but because they're all on 0 at the moment, they're all living over each other. So we're going to create a slider. Remember, the shortcut for this is just double click the background and type a number roughly around what the slider is going to be. So our midpoint is going to, so our top point might be like 3 millimeter radius away, so 3.0. That's going to make sure I get a double slider. All right. So this is going to be the top point, like that, and I'm going to put it in X. All right. So that means it's come out in X from there. Oh, sorry, this is actually the bottom point. My bad. So this is controlling where the bottom point is going to start. Then the midpoint should be, it's always going to arc outwards a bit, so the midpoint should be this value plus something. So we're going to do an addition. So we're going to do an add, we're going to do an addition of whatever this is, plus, let's do them in order like that, plus another slider. So I'm going to create a new slider, double click the background, 0.1. So we're going to attach this to here, and attach this to that X. Alright, so there's a second point, which I guess we need a bit more leeway in here, so our maximum number here might be 2. And drag this out a little bit. Okay. So as we drag the top point, you can see that the second point moves away from a relative, and you can move the second point closer. The second point also needs to go up in Z. Alright, so we've got the first 2 points solved. We need to get the Z controller. So let's give these a name. Let's call this bottom. Always do this on the fly. So this is the bottom point, and then this is the midpoint. Midpoint curvature. All right. Let's move our stuff so we can see what we're doing. So that's the midpoint curvature about to be controlled. And then we've got to do the midpoint. You know, I can't record. Okay, so we've got this thing here, and we now need to go Z. So we're going to do Z, I want it to be halfway between these 2 points, so we're going to finish the last point first. So the last point is the same thing, okay? So the same as the top one. We're going to have another addition, Control C and Control V. And the addition this time is going to be with another slider. So I'm going to take this one, Control C and Control V, I'm going to bring it down. And this is going to be the addition on top of that one. All right, so this is going to be the addition on top of that addition. So this is going to go in here, and this is going to go in there. And so then now you've got a third point that's going to move out. Oh, we've got to connect it, my bad. connect that to X, and then you've got a third point that also moves lateral to these. Okay, so if you move the bottom point out, all of them move out in X. If you follow over here, if you move the mid curvature out, the top one follows with it, and the mid curvature can come in. Okay, so we have everything we need for X. Now we've got to build for Z. All right, so we're going to need the height of our curve. So I'm going to make another slider 5.5, and I'm going to connect it to the Z of the endpoint. So this is our height. Let's call it height. Okay. So this is going to be the height. This is the bottom point, and so now you should have one point up here, and we can bring the height down. And then we want this height to be halfway between that height and this height, so we get a nice arc. Right, so now we've got to do a division. We'll take this divided by, we can divide this by 2. So the height of this Z, we're going to do a division. Divide, division, where is division? Division. So we're going to do a division of this number by 2. Okay, which is going to become the height of that. All right, so now we have everything sorted out the way we want. So we have 4 points controlling the input for this arc. You've got the bottom point, you've got the midpoint curvature, you've got this one I forgot to rename, so top point. So this is the top point. Top point, call it distance if you want, the distance outwards. Top point size, let's call it size. And then this is the top point height. Okay, so now you've got something that kind of makes sense to you. You've got your midpoint curvature, you can have it, you can bring the top point in, up and down, and your top point size out there, and then you can change the curvature value from here. All right. Now let's make an arc. So now we're going to produce an arc. The arc that we're looking for is a 3-point arc, and we're going to connect point 1, point 2, point 3. And we're now going to draw an arc between those guys. All right. So your midpoint curvature is going to come out here. You can make it more or less curvy, and you can bring your top point in if you need to, and then reduce your curvature if you need to. All right. So depending on what you need for that item. This is going to come out like that, and now we're ready to do the pipe. So the same thing we did before, we drew an arc using a couple of points, or we drew a curve using a couple of points, except now those points are in our control. Okay, we can adjust them infinitely. I'm going to bring that bottom point back into about 0, something like that, and now we need to pipe it. So we're going to use a pipe command, pipe variable. All right, the first point of this is pretty easy. There's an arc, and we want to connect it to a curve. So I'm going to do that. Now a little thing about parametric curves, parametrized curves. This arc is going to always have a different length because it depends on the height. I mean, that length is going to change all the time. So if you're doing a variable pipe and you said I want a radius of blah at the start and then 1 millimeter in, or currently this is 2.5 millimeters, I want a radius of 6 and then a radius of 3. That works if you know what the length of the curve is. It doesn't work when you don't know what the length of the curve is, and that curve's going to change. So that's called reparametrization. We can define this curve for Rhino as the start of the curve is 0, the end of the curve is 1, the middle of the curve is 0.5, 1/4 in is 0.25, a tenth is 0.1, etc. So we can define a curve as a percentage along its length. All right, to do that, we've got to take this input curve here, we've got to say reparametrize this curve for us. Then over here, I can take the parameters as a list. Where do I want to create radiuses? I want to create it at 0, and I want to create it at 1. All right, so I need to create a panel. Edit the context, got a 0 and a 1. All right, so I've got these two items inside here. Let's move that up, something like that. So these are my two items. Oops, it wants to be multi-line data, my bad. All right, so these are my two parameters over here, and then I can now make adjustable radii. So my starting point is going to be 0.4. So I've got a list of radii, so that's my starting point, and then I'm going to Control C and Control V that, which is going to be my end one. I'm going to put a little panel inside there to show you just what the numbers are. All right, so let's make that multi-line data, and let's make that a bit smaller. And we're going to add multiple inputs to this. So we're going to drag the first one, and then using Shift, we're going to drag the second one. All right, and you can see that as I now change this, I can change the numbers that are in this panel. So at 0, I want 0.4 mil, and at 1, I want 0.6 mil. So when I connect this one into here now, you can see in the screen I have 0.6 at the end, and I can make it bigger, smaller, thinner, fatter, as I need. Now this will follow, the whole part will just keep redrawing itself as we need. Oopsie, my bad. Okay, so you get a little bit more curvature. You can also change the ends of your item. Alright, so then to wrap this up very quickly, you can make this is your bottom point diameter, that's your top point diameter for the support. The last thing we know is that we want it round, okay, and normally your tip diameter is a little bit smaller. So there's a parameter inside here, the end cap, you can set to round. Okay, so that's the same as we did in the first exercise, everything is there. We now have a way to control the item quite intimately. Every degree of this item we can change. We can also change the thing we couldn't change before in Rhino. We can change the size and the shape of the end and the start diameters of the points. The last thing to do is to do an array. So I'm going to look for an array. We want to do a polar array, which is this one here. Right. The geometry we want to change is that pipe. So we're going to connect it to there. It's already, as luck would have it, it's picked the plane, top plane as the top. If that wasn't the case, you could have just set a custom plane. And we need a number slider. So for the number slider, I'm going to type in the number 3, and I'm going to double click to edit it, and I'm going to say my maximum range is 6 with a default value of 6. That means you can produce this in many different sizes. So for the number, I'm going to go in there. All right, and we can bring this out here. So now you're able to control this for 4 claw collets, 6 claw collets as you need. You can produce thicker, thinner ends. I'll save this and I'll stick it in the chat, guys. And then, I mean, literally, you've produced a more useful item, even if you only use this once. And remember to name your stuff. Tip diameter. Okay, and base diameter. And prong count, I guess you want to call this one. If you do this, you remember what you're doing, right? So in most use cases, you would use it as 4, and you bring your height down as you need. So you can use this to bake a few different items. You can bring in your top size, curvatures, bring that in a little bit. And you can build a bunch of constructs as you see fit or as you require, all right? To bake this, I'm going to create a little geometry holder. I'm going to connect the geometry to this. I'm going to bring the geometry holder over to the side here. And this is now time to do a little bit of housekeeping. I like to move these things away from my sliders a bit. And then I like to align my sliders to each other. Because really all I want to do when I open this guy up is I want to be able to bake this geometry. So everything else we used to construct it up till then, highlight it, hide it, we don't need it, we only need this item. All right. So top point height, let's make this a little bit smaller, and then you can bake. So you can produce a couple of these. You can just right click here, you can go bake, and OK, and then you've got the physical geometry. All right, and then you can make one that's, one for 6 prong or 4 prong, and then you can bake that. And then you can make one with a smaller tip diameter or edge diameter. I've got these two mixed up. So this is base diameter. This is tip diameter, is that right? Cancel. Yeah, so that's tip diameter there. Okay. Alright, so you can change over here, you can produce more prongs, less prongs. I mean, you could have gone up to 10 prongs if you wanted. And you can have a play with that. Make it as big or as small as you need, you can even invert it like that if you wanted. And you can cook out as many of these containers as you need. Okay guys, hope that was useful.